In the year 1108 BC, Brutus, a descendant of Aeneas, who was the son of Venus, came to England with his companions after the taking of Troy, and founded the city of Troynovant, which is now called London. After 1,000 years, during which the city grew and flourished exceedingly, one Lud became its king. He built walls and towers, and, among other things, the famous gate whose name still survives in the street called Ludgate. King Lud was succeeded by his brother Cassivellaunus, in whose time happened the invasion of the Romans under Julius Caesar. Troynovant, or London, then became a Roman city. It was newly fortified by Helena, mother of Constantine the Great. This is the legend invented or copied by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and continued to be copied, and perhaps believed, almost to the present day. Having paid this tribute to old tradition, let us relate the true early history of the city, as it can be recovered from such documents as remain, from discoveries made in excavation, from fragments of architecture, and from the lie of the ground. The testimony derived from the lie of the ground is more important than any other, for several reasons. First, an historical document may be false or inexact. For instance, the invention of a Brutus, son of Aeneas, is false and absurd on the face of it. Or a document may be wrongly interpreted. Thus, a fragment of architecture may through ignorance be ascribed to the Roman, when it belongs to the Norman. One needs to be a profound student of architecture before an opinion of value can be pronounced upon the age of any monument, or it may be taken to mean something quite apart from the truth, as if a bastion of the old Roman fort, such as has been discovered on Cornhill, should be taken for part of the Roman wall. But the lie of the ground cannot deceive, and, in competent hands, cannot well be misunderstood. If we know the course of streams, the height and position of hills, the run of valleys, the site of marshes, the former extent of forests, the safety of harbors, the existence of fords, we have in our hands a guidebook to history. We can then understand why towns were built in certain positions, why trade sprang up, why invading armies landed at certain places, what course was taken by armies, and why battles have been fought on certain spots. For these things are not the result of chance, they are necessitated by the geographical position of the place, and by the lie of the ground. Why, for instance, is Dover one of the oldest towns in the country? Because it is the nearest landing ground for the continent, and because its hill forms a natural fortress for protecting that landing ground. Why was there a Roman station at Portsmouth? On account of the great and landlocked harbor. Why is Durham an ancient city? Because the steep hill made it almost impregnable. Why is Chester so called? Because it, 9, was from very ancient times a fort, or stationary camp, El Castra, against the wild Welsh. On these low hillocks marked on the map London was first founded. The site had many advantages. It was raised above the malarious marsh, it overlooked the river, which here was at its narrowest, it was protected by 2 other streams and by the steepness of the cliff, and it was over the little port formed by the fall of one stream, 11, into the river. Here, on the western hill, the Britons formed their first settlement. There were as yet no ships on the silent river where they fished. There was no ferry, no bridge, no communication with the outer world. The woods provided the first Londoners with game and skins. The river gave them fish. They lived in round huts formed of clay and branches with thatched roofs. If you desire to understand how the Britons fortified themselves, you may see an excellent example not very far from London. It is the place called St. George's Hill, near Weybridge. They wanted a hill, the steeper the side the better. They made it steeper by entrenching it. They sometimes surrounded it with a high earthwork and sometimes with a stockade, the great thing being to put the assailing force under the disadvantage of having to climb. The three riversides of the London fort presented a perpendicular cliff surmounted by a stockade. The other side, on which lay the forest, probably had an earthwork also surmounted by a stockade. There were no buildings and there was no trade. The people belonged to a tribe and had to go out and fight when war was carried on with another tribe. The fort was called Llywelyn, the Lake Fort. When the Romans came, they could not pronounce the word Llyn, Flynn in the British way, and called it Lon, hence their word Londinium. Presently adventurous merchants from Gaul pushed across to Dover, and sailed along the coast of Kent past Sandwich and through the open channel which then separated the island of Thanet from the mainland, into the broad Thames, and, sailing up with the tide, dropped anchor off the fishing villages which lay along the river and began to trade. What did they offer? What Captain Cook offered the Polynesians: weapons, clothes, adornments. What did they take, 12, away? Skins and slaves at first, skins and slaves, and tin and iron, after the country became better known and its resources were understood. The taste for trading once acquired rapidly grows. It is a delightful thing to exchange what you do not want for what you do want, and it is so very easy to extend one's wants. So that when the Romans first saw London, it was already a flourishing town with a great concourse of merchants.